There's a brief story I read recently in the New York Times, and I thought it might be appropriate to share with everyone here. It's hard to say over something that's written down in a way that doesn't sound boring, but this is a story about two people returning to themselves, much like we're all trying to do this time of year. Here goes. One night, I took a cab home from work. As I opened the door to get out, I heard a man scream, "Hey," directly into my ear. He was on a bike, trying to force his way through the narrow space between the cab and a parked car. I pointed toward the other side of the street. "Hey," I yelled back, "do you think you should be in the bike lane?" "You're supposed to look," he called back, and then shot off. I jumped out of the cab and shot off after him. For someone who was exhausted, I was running at a pretty good pace. I was pleased and surprised when I caught up to him at an intersection where he had been forced to stop. I was ready to really dress him down about his complete lack of attention to New York City bike protocol. I got right up next to him. "Hey," I screamed. He looked startled. "Yeah," he replied. "Are you all right?" I asked. "You're right, I should have looked." "No," he answered, "you're right, I should have been in the bike lane." Then he motioned for me to come close. "Come here," he said. We hugged. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm having a really bad day." "I'm sorry you're having a bad day," I told him. "I hope it gets better." "Thanks," he replied. "I hope you have a nice day too." And then he rode off into the splash of car lights that swirl through the streets on Manhattan night. Amongst the different svarim that are hardly pulled off the shelves during Elul, the Mesilas Yesharim, the Shari Tshuvas, the Orchos Tzadikim, is Rav Kook's important sefer Oros HaTshuva. It was the first sefer I bought in the Elul of my Shana Aleph at Yeshiva, and the time that Rav Waxman spent learning parts of it with me helped make it a very special sefer for me, and I thought it'd be apropos to share a couple of points from it here. Rav Kook explains all over the sefer, but starting from the very beginning, that the tshuva process doesn't really consist of a self-deprecating, remorseful mindset, focusing on how our misguided actions seem to have changed us into something we wish we weren't. Isn't it so often that we pause at least once during davening on Rosh Hashanah and just let out a sigh, wishing we had done things differently, ruminating about how if only a different choice were made, I'd be in such a better place now, I'd be a nicer person, I'd learn more, I'd be a better spouse, a more attentive teacher, a more devoted student. And instead, I sit under a layer of rust, changed by errors I feel I have committed. Rather, if Kook guides us, we haven't changed. Tshuva is not a process of taking off rust and reshaping ourselves. It's about shaking off the dust and seeing that we're right there, underneath the entire time, unchanged. Our sense of doing good, of doing right, it's there the whole time. And during Elul, during this process, we return to it and we return to ourselves. Rav Kook writes that a person wakes up to shaking off the dust of this sin and feeling a sense of freedom, returning to themselves. Everything, he writes, eventually returns. Rabbi Nachman quotes a Zohar, "Ana zamin lemehavi," I am prepared to be, explaining that tshuva is less a process of formal repentance and more a process of deciding, of reminding myself of who I am. A Chizzuk video needs a vort, a short and nice idea that'll inspire us to do something we find meaningful when we have it in mind. I don't have a vort to share, but I have this notion of Rav Kook telling me that this Elul, I need to try and go back to myself. The novelist Graham Greene wrote, "There's always one moment in childhood when the door opens and lets the future in. Ana zamin l'mahavi, I am ready to try and look and return to myself and let the future in." Davening for all of us to have a meaningful Elul.
בכהנים והעם העומדים בעזרה כשהיו שומעים את שם השם המפורש יוצא מפי כהן גדול היו קוראים משתחווים ונופלים על פניהם ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד